Welcome to Downpour.com's interview series. I'm Malcolm Hilgartner, and today it's my pleasure to be speaking with Edan Lepucki. Edan is the author of the best-selling novel California, an apocalyptic thriller that has received rave reviews. She's a graduate of Oberlin College and the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop, and her short fiction has been published in Narrative Magazine, the Los Angeles Times Magazine, Meridian, 5 Chapters, and McSweeney's, among others. She is a staff writer for the online literary magazine The Millions and teaches creative writing at the UCLA Extension Writers Program and for Writing Workshops Los Angeles, which she founded. Hachette Book Group published the audiobook of California, read by Emma Galvin, in July 2014. It is available now on Downpour.com. So, welcome, Edan, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your novel, California, has become the book of the summer, thanks in part to a call-out from author Sherman Alexie on the Colbert Report during a discussion on the show about how the ongoing dispute between your publisher, Hachette Book Group USA, and Amazon.com has affected new authors. So, how has your life changed since the Colbert bump?
In some ways, it's changed a lot, and in most ways, it hasn't changed at all. So it's changed in that I got a big book tour and I got to go on national television, which was really exciting. And I suddenly have a lot more professional opportunities, it seems, and I have a lot more readers, which is really thrilling. And I got to meet a lot of them at various bookstores across the country, which was just the coolest. But apart from that, which is obviously huge and important, my day-to-day life is exactly the same. I have a 3-year-old son who really doesn't care how many books I sell. And I'm writing a new book, and the writing process doesn't really care how many books you've sold of a previous manuscript. So I'm sort of relieved that my everyday life and my artistic process has remained the same, and that it's just me facing a blank page again and entering into a new fictive world that's exhilarating and challenging, as it always was.
Might take a few weeks for your signature hand to recover. I seem to recall reading somewhere that you signed something like 10,000 copies of books at Powells in Portland, which is almost as much as I think your initial print run. Is that right?
Yes. My initial print run was 12,000, and I signed 10 or just under 10,000 in about 2 days, which it surprisingly wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. I signed standing up, and the people at Powell's are just really efficient, capable booksellers, and they had a whole book signing kind of factory going on, and I walked around in a circle, and they added more and more books to the piles. The height of the pile never diminished, and I just busted it out. It was actually really fun.
During your appearance on the Colbert Report, you were able to call attention to another debut author, Stephen Eric Clark, author of Sweetness Number 9. Did it feel good to be able to pay it forward in a way?
Yes, it felt so good. I was so happy to have Sherman Alexie recommend my book. And of course, I was so grateful that my book got that kind of attention. But I also felt guilty because I didn't want to be the sole beneficiary of this dispute. And I know a lot of authors are suffering. And, I've read a ton of great books by Hachette, my publisher. And so it was really exciting to kind of take the attention away from me and my book and to give it to another author. I have been a bookseller. I was a bookseller for a long time before I published. So it kind of felt like a return to my roots of being able to just have a staff pick, as it were, and kind of hold up another book. And Sweetness Number 9 is a really terrific, funny, fascinating novel. And it's really different from mine, too. So I liked that as well, of kind of showcasing a book that is great and also just a departure from what you might think I would recommend. So I was happy to do it.
Back to California, though, the publicity around that book has certainly brought, I'm sure, a lot of welcome attention to it. But the bottom line is that it is a terrific book. Tell us a little bit about the story and what motivated you to write it.
When I first started writing it, I decided I wanted to write a post-apocalyptic domestic drama. That was the phrase that kind of popped into my mind. So that's the way that I usually pitch it to people when they ask me what it's about. It's speculative fiction that takes place about 40 years in the future in the state of California. And it's about a husband and wife who flee a devastated LA to live by themselves in the wilderness. And the backdrop is this sort of the world is ending, or it just is getting worse and worse and worse. But the focus of the novel is really on their relationship. And when the novel opens, Frida, the wife, finds out she's pregnant. And it's about how they decide to leave their sort of isolated existence to go find the nearest settlers, and kind of the secrets that they keep from one another and the things they find in this community of settlers that is surprising and upsetting, and sort of a book about who to trust and what intimacy is and human connection and all that kind of stuff.
Was there something that you discovered about these survivalist groups that are out there? I know they exist in Oregon and other parts of the Northwest that led you to maybe set this, or was this something that you created out of whole cloth?
I have no idea what possessed me to write this book. Because beyond the post-apocalyptic domestic drama sentence that kind of popped into my mind and I really liked, for one, I don't even go camping. I'm not outdoorsy in the least, and I didn't really do any research. And most of my work is very realist, and this was the first narrative that I'd ever tried to write that was set in the future. So it was really outside of my wheelhouse. But I think that's why I was attracted to it. I really was excited by doing something so different. And I'm not much of a researcher as a writer. I just play pretend and make everything up. And then in revision, that's when a lot of the more logical, research-oriented, fact-checking stuff has to come in for me.
So I understand that California it's your first published novel. I think it's your second novel that you've written, but you've mostly published short fiction before, right? What was it like making that transition to the longer form?
I have another novel that never got published. I call it my practice novel or my dress rehearsal novel. But when I started writing that novel previously and writing California, I actually realized that the novel as a form, I'm much more suited to that form. I enjoy reading short stories, but I can't say I really enjoy writing them. And I didn't realize I didn't enjoy writing them until I began working on longer stories, like working on novels. And I just really love the expansiveness of the form and the freedom of the form and the ability to do flashbacks and to really consider pacing in a larger way, in a more expansive way. So in many ways, novel writing was a lot easier for me than the short stories that I wrote. Although I will say novels take a lot longer commitment. They take a lot more time to write. So you have to find the right material and the right characters that you actually want to hang out with for years at a time. And stories you can write, in a day or a month or a couple months. So there's not as much commitment. But on a pleasure level, I just think novels are so much more fun to write.
Well, when did you first start writing?
I've always written, or at least I wanted to be a writer even before I actually wrote. So I guess I always wanted to be a writer as soon as I started reading, I think. I just loved to read and I wanted to do what those writers had done. So I started writing like in elementary school. I mean, obviously not seriously. And I started to take it seriously in high school. I wrote poetry. And then in college, I majored in English and creative writing. And at Oberlin, they have a dedicated creative writing major in its own department with a lot of really terrific teachers. And this author, Dan Shawn, who wrote the story collection Among the Missing and the novel Await Your Reply, among other books, he became my mentor and just really encouraged me to pursue it more seriously. So from then on, from college on, I was writing fiction and really into it. And the only goal I've ever had was to be a writer. And I've been working towards that, I guess, since I was 5, or you could say since I was 17. I don't know, but for a long time.
Seems like every writer has to have that mentor that says, you can do this, you can be really good at that. And it sounds like he was that person. Are you still in contact with him? Do you still run your stuff by him?
Yeah, I don't send him my work only because I recognize that he has many students who actually, attend college and are paying to attend college, and he's getting paid to read their work. So I don't try to bother him with my work, although I do sometimes email him for advice, and he did read my novel and he gave it a very lovely blurb. And I'm going actually soon to do a reading at Oberlin, and I'm just really excited to see him. And I just respect him so much as an artist and as a teacher. And since I'm a teacher now, I agree with you that really those mentorships are so important to new and young writers, to sort of believe that somebody cares, that somebody is reading your work and giving you strong advice and useful, thoughtful criticism, I think is really important.
In addition to writing, you do teach. You as you said, you teach writing workshops at UCLA, and then you establish your own writing workshops in Los Angeles. What made you decide to go into teaching?
I love to teach, and I think it's partly because I'm a really big extrovert, so I'm quite a showboat in person. And so I think it satisfies that part of my personality to be among people in conversation that writing doesn't. So writing is such a practice in introversion in some ways. You really have to go inside yourself and be focusing really deeply, and you have to be alone in a room for hours and hours and be okay with that and actually like that. And I do like that. But there's another side of me that loves to be among other people, among other readers, really. So I knew I'd always wanted to teach. And when I graduated from Iowa, there weren't really very many opportunities for me to teach because I hadn't published a book. So I thought, oh, I'll just teach a class at my apartment. I think there's just pure hubris in the idea that I could just have my own workshop from my home. But that's what I did. And I started this company, Writing Workshops LA, which enabled me to get 8 writers in my living room with some wine, some sparkling water, maybe some cookies. And that actually was so helpful to me in learning to write novels, is talking about fiction and craft with them really helped me to kind of understand what I was trying to do artistically. And also teaching at UCLA, of course, really strong students there as well. So I'm happy that I get teaching is an outlet for me for my big personality.
I suspect as a teacher, you're often trying to develop in your students or encouraging them to find their own voice as a writer. When did your own voice, your unique voice, emerge?
I don't know. I mean, it's a really hard question because, yeah, I think I have a student, Melissa Chadburn. If you're listening, Melissa, hello. But she always talks about something a teacher said to her was that when a true, strong voice emerges on the page, it has the sound of castanets in the reader's ear. And I think that's true, that when you're reading, especially as a teacher, you're reading a student's work and something really pure and exciting, it kind of bounds off the page and you hear that little click, 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 click of energy as if they're castanets in your ear. So I tend to try with my students to point that out when I recognize that on the page, and because I've had it done for me from other teachers. But at the same time, I'm not really sure where my voice came from or when it emerged. And I also think voice continually emerges, that our voice isn't really a static thing, that it can change depending on what we're reading or what is going on in our lives, or in particular, what book we're writing. So my voice might sound one way working on California and differently working on my novella, for instance. So I'm kind of interested in the voice being kind of a living organism, and that makes following writers over the course of their career really kind of thrilling, I think.
What are the books on your night table right now that you're reading?
Well, I just finished the new ton of French, The Secret Place. I'm really excited to read another apocalyptic novel by a fellow Millions staff writer, Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11. I want to read Marlon James's book, A Brief History of 7 Killings, which starts in 1970s Jamaica, if I'm correct. But I loved his other book, his previous novel, The Book of Night Women. Those are the books that I'm most excited about. And right now I'm reading a lot of books to blurb them, to kind of pay it forward in that regard. So I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about those because I haven't started reading them and they're not out. So I don't want to tease the readers listening. I have to say Margaret Atwood for sure. I love The Handmaid's Tale is probably my favorite novel, but I also love her realist, kind of droll novels as well. Jennifer Egan, I am an enormous fan of. I really love Look at Me. Of course, I love Visit from the Goon Squad, but Look at Me was the first novel of hers that I read, and I just found it so ambitious and utterly readable and addictive. I recently got on a Edith Wharton kick. So I had read The Age of Innocence a while back, but I read The House of Mirth and it totally blew my mind. And then I just finished Custom of the Country and I just fell in love. I just love her unlikable, complicated female heroines. I think they're just terrific. John Williams, he has 3 novels. I've only read one, but it's one of my favorite novels. It's called Stoner, and that's a history of one man, normal guy, college professor's life, and it's just utterly heartbreaking novel. Edward P. Jones, who wrote The Known World about Black slave owners in antebellum Virginia. And I just love his prose style. He writes in this beautiful, omniscient, almost biblical voice that I would never try myself. And so I love to kind of dive into it as a reader. I think it's magnificent.
Well, tell us something more about yourself. Your website says you like books, as we can tell, dancing and filling out forms. Okay, I'm guessing that only 2 of those 3 are true, but correct me if I'm wrong.
They're all true. I actually love to fill out forms. Nowadays we don't get to fill out that many forms, but I think it's really relaxing. When I was a child, I used to collect the little magazine subscription forms that are always falling out of your copy of the New Yorker. I used to keep them in a shoebox, and sometimes I'd go sit in my closet and fill them out. I don't know why, but there's something pleasing. You know all the answers, I guess, and you just continue copying down your address in the little brackets. So that is a true pastime of mine. Dancing is a love of mine. I studied ballet and modern dance for a long time, and I was in a hip hop dance group in college. And so dancing is really, God, I love to dance. I just met someone who doesn't like to dance, and I just kept asking her questions. I just couldn't believe it. I felt like she was an alien from another planet. I can't imagine somebody not hearing a song and being just moved to move. I find it mysterious that one wouldn't love dancing, at least privately.
Have you had a chance to hear Emma Galvin's narration of California, the audiobook narration?
My husband and I put it on in the car, and it was so funny because it's dedicated to my husband. It says "For Patrick," and we're listening to it, and it says "For Patrick." And even my son, who's only 3, we all gasped. It was just too funny. We listened to it for about 2 minutes, and then I had to turn it off because it was just a little bit too weird to have somebody else reading my book. And I've heard this from so many authors, so I know I'm not alone. It was almost like an outer body experience to hear my book being read aloud by somebody who's not me. And I'm not saying it was a bad read or anything. It just was too strange. I guess it was also exciting, to have an audiobook felt very special, but I had to turn it off.
Sort of like hearing a pop song on the radio that you wrote. Do you listen to audiobooks?
I have before. I don't drive now really much at all. And I have a son, so if I'm cooking, he's here and he wants to talk to me or he has something else going on. I do have a very strong memory of listening to the audio of Truth and Beauty, the memoir by Ann Patchett, which is about her friend Lucy when they went to Iowa. And I listened to it the first weekend I was in Iowa. My husband wasn't there yet, and there was no phone or internet hooked up, no TV. I didn't know anyone in Iowa City. And I remember just lying on the living room floor and listening to this audio tape for hours and hours and hours. And I have such a visceral memory of that book, I think because I listened to it that way, or I consumed it that way. So that's a really special memory for me.
Well, I hope you find your way back to listen to the entire audiobook soon because it's really good.
Thank you. I have heard from readers, and you're the ones that matter, not the weird author hang up. Listen, mine doesn't matter at all.
This has been delightful talking with you today, Edan. Thanks so much, and best of luck in the future with California and whatever comes next.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for joining us for this Downpour.com interview with Edan Lepucki. You can find the audiobook of Edan's novel, California, for download or on CD at Downpour.com.